Hey, get away from her right now. The voice cracked through the late afternoon air like a snapped wire, sharp enough to make heads turn before anyone understood what was happening. And in the center of it all stood Ethan Brooks, his hand hovering just inches from the frail shoulder of an elderly woman who looked like she had wandered out of time itself, her silver hair uneven under the fading sunlight, her cardigan hanging loose as if it no longer remembered how to fit her frame, and for a split second the entire sidewalk froze. In that quiet, suspended way cities sometimes do, where footsteps slow, conversations dissolve, and judgment rushes in faster than truth ever could, because from a distance all anyone saw was a black teenager standing too close to a confused old white woman. And that was enough for assumptions to harden into certainty, for whispers to ripple outward like wind over dry leaves. "What's he doing?" someone muttered. "Call someone." Another voice added, already pulling out a phone, already deciding. The story before hearing a single word, and Ethan felt it all land on him at once. That familiar weight pressing into his chest, the kind that didn't come from anything he had done but from everything people believed he might do. His fingers slowly lowering as he took half a step back, careful, deliberate, like even his movement needed permission now, while the woman turned slightly toward him, her eyes unfocused but searching, as if he was the only thing in the world that hadn't blurred into noise, her lips parting without sound, confusion written in every small tremble of her expression. And for a moment Ethan forgot about the crowd, about the man who had shouted, about the phones pointed in his direction, because all he could see was that look, that quiet panic of someone who didn't know where they were or how they got there. And he recognized it, not from experience, but from something deeper, something instinctive, the same way you know when someone needs help even before they ask. And he swallowed, steadying his voice, trying to keep it calm despite the eyes pressing into him from every angle. "Ma'am, are you okay?" he said softly. But the question barely had time to settle before the man who had shouted stepped closer, inserting himself between them like a wall. His posture stiff with certainty. "I said step back," he repeated, louder this time, as if volume alone made him right. And Ethan felt the distance grow not just physically but socially. That invisible line drawn in an instant. The one that decided who belonged and who didn't, who was trusted and who wasn't. And behind them the city kept moving, cars passing, a bus exhaling at the corner, the glow of storefront lights beginning to hum against the dimming sky. But here, in this small circle of tension, everything narrowed down to a single moment that hadn't finished unfolding yet, because the old woman reached out, not toward the man, not toward anyone else, but toward Ethan, her hand trembling slightly in the air as if guided by something she couldn't explain, and that simple, fragile motion cut through the noise sharper than any accusation, leaving a silence that no one was ready to interpret. The man's hand hovered in front of Ethan now, not touching him but close enough to draw a boundary that everyone else immediately understood, and Ethan stayed still, shoulders slightly lowered, not in defeat but in restraint, because he had learned long ago that even the smallest movement could be misread, could be turned into something it was never meant to be. And the murmurs around them thickened, low voices stacking over one another like static, while a phone camera shifted closer, the faint click of recording barely audible over the hum of passing traffic. And yet Ethan's attention did not drift to any of it, because the old woman's hand was still reaching for him, her fingers trembling in the air as if they were holding onto something invisible, something only she could feel. And he noticed the details others missed, the way her shoes were mismatched in wear, one more scuffed than the other, the way her sleeve had a faint stain near the cuff, like she had been walking for hours without direction, and the way her breathing came shallow and uneven, not from fear alone but from confusion that had settled deep inside her. And he recognized it as something fragile, something that did not belong in the middle of a crowded sidewalk full of strangers who had already decided she was a problem to avoid, not a person to help. And he took a slow breath, careful to keep his voice steady as he spoke again, not to the man, not to the crowd, but to her. "It is okay. I am right here," he said, softer this time, his words measured, spaced out, as if each one needed room to land gently. And her eyes flickered toward him, unfocused but drawn, like she was trying to place him inside a memory that would not fully form, and the man in front of Ethan shifted his weight, clearly unsettled by the lack of resistance, by the absence of anything he could escalate, and that hesitation created a small opening, barely noticeable, but enough for Ethan to step slightly to the side, not forward, not challenging, just enough to remain in her line of sight, and the city noise seemed to dull for a moment, like someone had turned the volume down on everything except the quiet exchange happening between them. And then the woman's hand found his sleeve, light but certain, her grip weak yet intentional. And that simple contact said more than any explanation could, because she had chosen him in the middle of all that noise, in the middle of all those people, and Ethan felt a tightness in his chest that had nothing to do with fear and everything to do with responsibility, because once someone reached for you like that, you could not just walk away, not without leaving something behind that would stay with you. And he knew that feeling too well, the kind that followed you home, the kind that sat with you in silence long after the moment had passed. And so he stayed, even as the man glanced around, uncertain now, his earlier confidence softening into something less defined, and the crowd's energy shifted with it, curiosity replacing suspicion in small, uneven waves, while a distant siren echoed somewhere far down the street, faint but approaching. And Ethan kept his focus where it mattered, lowering himself just slightly, so he was closer to her eye level, not looming, not distant, just present. And in that narrow space between chaos and calm, something fragile began to settle, not fully understood, not yet resolved, but no longer ignored. The faint wail of a siren grew louder now, threading its way through the late afternoon traffic, and with it came a subtle shift in the crowd as people adjusted their stance. Some stepping back as if distance could separate them from responsibility, others leaning in just enough to witness what might unfold next, their faces lit by the soft glow of their phone screens, and Ethan felt the old woman's grip tighten slightly on his sleeve, not with strength, but with urgency, like she sensed something changing even if she could not name it, and he stayed where he was, grounded, steady, letting his presence speak louder than anything else around them. While the man who had first shouted cleared his throat, his voice less certain now. Someone already called it in. He said to no one in particular, as if explaining himself, as if trying to reclaim a version of control that was slipping quietly through his fingers, and Ethan did not respond, not because he had nothing to say, but because he understood that words, in moments like this, were often less important than what you chose to do when no one was guiding you. And the old woman's eyes drifted again, scanning the unfamiliar buildings, the passing faces, the noise that refused to settle into anything recognizable, and her lips moved faintly before a whisper escaped, fragile and uneven. I was going home, she said, the sentence breaking apart as soon as it formed, and Ethan leaned slightly closer, careful not to crowd her, his voice low and patient. Do you remember where that is? He asked, not expecting a clear answer, but offering her something to hold on to. And she hesitated, her brow tightening as if she were searching through layers of fog, and for a moment it looked like she might find it, like something just out of reach might come back to her. But then her expression softened into confusion again, and she shook her head almost imperceptibly, and that small motion carried more weight than any explanation, because it confirmed what Ethan already understood, that she was not just lost on the street, she was lost inside her own memory, and around them the city continued its rhythm, a delivery truck rumbling past, a pedestrian signal clicking over to red, the distant hum of voices rising and falling, and yet inside that small circle, time seemed to stretch, slowing just enough for choices to matter, and Ethan felt it then, that quiet decision settling into place, the one that did not announce itself loudly but anchored itself deep. Because leaving now would have been easy, stepping back, letting the approaching sirens take over, letting someone else carry the weight. But staying meant something different, something heavier, something that required him to be seen in a way he had spent most of his life avoiding. And still he did not move away, his hand now gently adjusting so she could hold on to him more comfortably, not pulling, not guiding, just offering stability. And the first patrol car turned the corner at the far end of the block, its lights reflecting faintly off the windows and polished surfaces around them, casting brief flashes of red and blue that danced across the scene without sound. And the crowd shifted again, attention redirecting toward the incoming authority, as if the presence of uniforms would define what was right, what was wrong, what had actually happened here. And Ethan exhaled slowly, steadying himself for what would come next, because he knew from experience that moments like this did not end when help arrived. They transformed, they reshaped, and sometimes they tested you even more. And still the old woman's hand remained in his grasp, small, trembling, but certain, as if in the middle of everything she had forgotten, she had remembered one thing clearly, that he had not walked away. The patrol car rolled to a slow stop along the curb, its engine idling low as the flashing lights cast brief reflections across the glass storefronts, and two officers stepped out with measured calm, not rushing, not aggressive, but carrying that quiet authority that made the crowd instinctively widen, creating space that had not existed a moment ago. And Ethan felt the shift immediately, the attention moving away from speculation and toward procedure, while the man who had first intervened straightened slightly, as if preparing to explain, his earlier confidence returning in fragments now that someone official had arrived to validate the situation. And one of the officers approached, his gaze moving from the woman's unsteady posture to Ethan's still figure, to the small but unbroken connection between them, and he paused just long enough to take it in before speaking. "What is going on here?" His voice even, controlled, not accusing but not assuming either, and the man answered quickly, stepping forward half a pace. "I saw him standing close to her. She looked confused. I thought something was not right." His words coming out faster than necessary, as if filling the silence before it could settle, and the officer nodded once, absorbing it without reaction, then shifted his attention back to Ethan, who met his gaze calmly, not defensive, not retreating, just present. "Sir, can you tell me what happened?" the officer asked, and Ethan took a breath, aware of the eyes still watching, the phone still recording, but he did not rush his answer. "I was passing by and saw her standing here. She looked lost. So I stopped to check on her," he said, his tone steady, his words simple, leaving no room for interpretation, and the second officer had already moved closer to the woman, his posture softening slightly as he addressed her directly. "Ma'am, can you tell me your name?" he asked, crouching just enough to be at her level. But her response did not come easily, her eyes flickering between faces, landing briefly on Ethan before drifting again, and her hand tightened around his sleeve as if anchoring herself to the only thing that had remained consistent. And the officer noticed, his gaze following that small detail, understanding something unspoken in the way she held on, and the crowd's energy shifted again, quieter now, less certain, as the initial tension gave way to something more complicated, something harder to define, and Ethan felt the weight of the moment deepen, not because he was being questioned, but because this was the point where things could easily turn in a direction he could not control, where perception could still outweigh truth if he stepped wrong. And yet he did not move away, did not pull back, because her grip had not loosened, and leaving her in that moment would have felt like breaking something fragile that had only just begun to hold. And the officer glanced once more between them before speaking again, this time more gently. "It is okay. We are here to help," he said, though it was unclear whether the reassurance was meant for her or for the situation itself. And in the distance another vehicle approached, slower, quieter, not marked like the patrol car, but moving with purpose, its presence not yet noticed by the crowd. And as it drew closer, something in the air shifted again, subtle but undeniable, like a change in pressure before a storm, while Ethan remained still, grounded in that single choice he had already made, the one that kept him there when walking away would have been easier, the one that now held everything in balance as the moment continued to unfold. The unmarked car came to a smooth stop just behind the patrol vehicle, its dark surface reflecting the fading light like a mirror that did not belong to the ordinary rhythm of the street. And for a moment no one moved, as if the scene itself was waiting to understand who had just arrived. And then the driver's door opened with quiet precision, revealing a man in a tailored coat who stepped out without urgency, yet carried a presence that shifted the air around him instantly. Not loud, not forceful, but unmistakably significant. And one of the officers turned, recognizing something before anyone else did, his posture straightening subtly as his attention redirected, while the crowd followed his gaze in a slow ripple, curiosity rising again, but this time edged with uncertainty. And Ethan noticed it too. Not the man at first, but the reaction to him. The way conversation thinned into silence. The way even the man who had accused him earlier took a small step back without realizing it. And the newcomer's eyes scanned the scene quickly, not searching randomly, but with focus, like he already knew what he was looking for. And when his gaze landed on the elderly woman, something in his expression changed, not dramatically, but enough to break through the composed exterior he had carried out of the car, and he moved forward, each step measured yet purposeful, while the officers instinctively gave him space. Not out of command, but recognition, and Ethan felt the woman's grip tighten again, her fingers curling slightly into the fabric of his sleeve as if sensing a shift she could not fully understand. And the man stopped a few feet away, his voice lower now, controlled but carrying an undercurrent that did not need volume to be heard. "Helen," he said, and the name seemed to hang in the air, unfamiliar to most, but landing somewhere deeper for her, because her eyes flickered, just for a second, like a distant light trying to come back on, and Ethan watched closely, not moving, not interrupting, as the moment stretched, and the man took another step, slower this time. "Careful. It is me," he added, his tone softening further, and the officers exchanged a brief glance, the situation shifting beyond routine, beyond something they could simply resolve with questions and reports, and the crowd, once so certain, now leaned into silence, unsure of where their earlier assumptions fit into what was unfolding, and the man's gaze moved briefly to Ethan, not dismissive, not accusatory, but evaluating, taking in the detail that mattered most. The fact that the woman had not let go of him, and that single observation seemed to recalibrate everything, because whatever had been assumed before no longer aligned with what was visible now, and Ethan felt that shift too, not as relief, but as a quiet release of tension he had been holding without realizing it. And yet he did not step away, did not pass her off, because her hand was still there, still choosing him, and the man paused just short of reaching for her, as if understanding that trust, once formed, could not be forced to transfer, and in that pause, in that restraint, something deeper settled into the space between them, something that suggested this moment was not just about being found, but about who had stayed when no one else did, and the city, still moving around them, seemed to fall into the background once again, leaving only the quiet weight of recognition beginning to take shape. The man did not reach for her immediately, and that restraint settled into the space like a quiet understanding, because the woman's fingers were still wrapped around Ethan's sleeve, her grip light but unwavering, and for a few seconds no one spoke, not the officers, not the crowd, not even the man who had called her name, and the city seemed to exhale around them, the earlier tension dissolving into something slower, heavier, more deliberate, while a soft breeze moved through the street, lifting the edge of her cardigan and carrying with it the distant hum of traffic and the faint rustle of leaves from somewhere beyond the concrete. And Ethan lowered himself just a little more so he was closer to her eye level, his movements careful, grounded, as if any sudden shift might break the fragile calm that had formed, and her breathing, though still uneven, began to steady in small, almost imperceptible increments, the rise and fall of her chest syncing with the quiet rhythm of his presence beside her, and the man watched this, not interrupting, his gaze fixed not just on her, but on the connection she had chosen, and something in his posture softened, the urgency giving way to recognition, because this was not a moment that could be rushed or reclaimed through authority alone, and the officer nearest them seemed to understand it as well, stepping back half a pace, allowing space for something more human than procedural to unfold, and the crowd, once so quick to judge, now lingered. In a different kind of silence, the kind that came when certainty slipped away and left only observation behind, and Ethan spoke again, his voice low, steady, meant only for her. "You are safe," he said, each word placed gently, without pressure, without expectation, and her eyes shifted toward him, clearer now, not fully focused but no longer lost in the same way, and her fingers adjusted slightly. Her grip no longer just instinct but intention, as if she was holding on to something she could finally recognize, even if she could not name it. And a faint light from the setting sun stretched across the pavement, casting long shadows that softened the edges of everything it touched, and in that warm, fading glow, the moment felt suspended between what had been confusion and what was slowly becoming clarity, and the man took one careful step closer, not reaching out yet, but close enough for his presence to be felt. His voice quieter now, stripped of everything but sincerity. "Helen, it is okay," he said, and this time the name seemed to settle deeper, her expression shifting just enough to suggest something was stirring beneath the surface, something fragile but real, and Ethan remained still, not stepping back, not stepping forward, simply allowing the moment to unfold without forcing it, because he understood, in a way that did not need explanation, that sometimes the strongest thing a person could do was not to act, but to stay, and in that stillness, in that shared breath of quiet, the noise of the world faded just enough for something true to emerge, something that had nothing to do with assumptions or fear or status, and everything to do with the simple, undeniable fact that when she had been lost, he had not walked away. Her fingers loosened slightly, not letting go but shifting with a kind of fragile awareness, and for the first time her eyes did not drift away immediately, instead lingering between Ethan and the man standing just a few feet in front of her, as if something deep within her was trying to connect two pieces of a memory that had been scattered, and the man took another careful step forward, his voice quieter now, stripped of anything that could startle or confuse. "Helen, it is me, Daniel," he said, and the name seemed to land differently this time, not as a distant echo but as something that brushed against recognition, because her brow furrowed gently and her lips parted, a faint breath catching as if she was about to say something, but could not yet find the words, and Ethan felt the subtle change in her grip, no longer just holding on out of fear, but out of something closer to understanding, and he remained still, allowing the moment to expand naturally, not interrupting, not guiding, just present, while the officers watched in silence, their earlier questions fading into the background as the situation revealed itself to be something far more personal than procedural, and the crowd, once restless and loud, had quieted into a near stillness, the kind that comes when people realize they may have misunderstood something important. And Daniel's gaze shifted briefly to Ethan again, this time with a different weight, not suspicion, not distance, but a quiet acknowledgement forming behind his eyes, because the evidence was no longer in words or explanations but in the simple fact that she had chosen to hold on to him. And Daniel exhaled slowly before speaking again, softer, closer. "You wandered off again. We have been looking everywhere," he said, his voice carrying a hint of relief that he did not try to hide. And the woman's eyes flickered once more, her focus sharpening just enough to catch on to the tone rather than the words, and she turned her head slightly toward him, confusion still present but no longer absolute, as if she could sense familiarity even if she could not fully recall it. And then something small but undeniable happened. Her hand, still holding Ethan's sleeve, shifted again, loosening just enough for her fingers to brush against his wrist before settling. And in that movement there was a quiet transition, not a release but a recognition that the moment was changing, and Ethan felt it too. That subtle shift where his role was no longer about holding everything together, but about allowing it to pass gently into the next place it needed to go. And Daniel stepped 1 inch closer, careful, patient, giving her time, and this time when he said her name, it carried not just urgency, but warmth. "Helen." And she blinked slowly, her expression softening, her gaze moving between them with less distance than before. And for a brief second her lips formed a sound, barely audible. Something that could have been a name or simply a breath. But it was enough. Enough for Daniel's shoulders to lower. Enough for the officers to relax their stance. Enough for the crowd to feel the shift without fully understanding it. And Ethan remained exactly where he was, steady, quiet, not stepping back yet, because he understood that even in a moment of recognition, letting go too quickly could break something delicate. And so he stayed, just long enough for the truth of what had happened to settle fully into the space around them, a truth that no longer needed to be explained because it could be seen clearly in the way she looked at him, and in the way the man who had arrived now understood exactly who had been there when it mattered most. The air seemed to settle into something softer, heavier with meaning than before, as Helen's gaze lingered a moment longer between Ethan and Daniel, her confusion no longer sharp, but gently fading into a fragile awareness. And Ethan felt the exact point where her grip changed again, her fingers slowly releasing the fabric of his sleeve, not abruptly, not with fear, but with a quiet trust that had been built in the silence between them. And he did not pull away, he simply allowed it, his hand lowering naturally to his side as she shifted her attention toward Daniel, who stepped forward with the same careful restraint he had shown from the beginning, his movements measured as if approaching something delicate that could not be rushed. And when he finally reached out, his hand did not grab or guide. It simply rested lightly near hers, giving her the choice. And after a brief pause, she placed her hand into his, her touch still tentative but no longer searching, and that small motion carried a weight that no one in the crowd could ignore, because it marked the moment where everything changed without a single dramatic word. And Daniel exhaled slowly, the tension leaving his shoulders in a way that revealed how much he had been holding beneath his composed exterior, and his eyes lifted to Ethan again, this time without distance, without uncertainty, only a quiet, undeniable respect that did not need to be spoken loudly to be understood. And the officers stepped back another half step, their presence no longer central to the moment, simply observing as it resolved itself in a way that required no intervention. And even the man who had first shouted stood still now, his earlier certainty replaced by something closer to reflection, his gaze dropping briefly before shifting away, as if the moment had shown him something he had not expected to see. And Daniel spoke then, his voice low, directed to Ethan but carrying enough for those nearby to hear. "You stayed with her," he said, not as a question but as a recognition. And Ethan nodded once, simple, without explanation, because there was nothing more to add. And Daniel's expression softened further, a faint line of gratitude forming beneath the surface of his composure. "Thank you," he said, and the words landed quietly but firmly, cutting through everything that had come before, not erasing it, but reshaping it. And Helen, still holding his hand, turned her head slightly back toward Ethan, her eyes clearer now than they had been at any point before. And though she did not speak, there was something in that look, something steady and present, that felt like acknowledgement, like a silent understanding that did not rely on memory but on something deeper. And Ethan met her gaze for just a second, offering a small, reassuring nod, not holding on to the moment longer than necessary, because he understood that it no longer belonged to him. And the last light of the evening stretched across the pavement, casting a warm glow that softened the edges of everything it touched, as Daniel gently guided Helen toward the waiting car, slow and careful. And for a brief moment the world seemed to pause again, not in tension this time, but in quiet recognition of something simple and rare, something that had happened not because anyone expected it, but because one person chose not to walk away. The car door closed with a soft, final sound that did not echo but settled, like the end of something that did not need applause. And as the engine started, the quiet hum blending into the rhythm of the street, Ethan stood where he was for a moment longer, not watching in a fixed stare, but simply allowing the moment to pass through him, the last traces of tension easing from his shoulders as the vehicle slowly pulled away, carrying Helen and Daniel back into a world that had nearly lost her. And around him the crowd began to dissolve, people turning back to their routines, their conversations returning in low, uncertain tones, as if they were still processing what they had witnessed but did not quite know how to name it. And the man who had first raised his voice lingered for a second before stepping back, his gaze avoiding Ethan now, not out of fear, but out of something quieter, something closer to reflection. And the officers exchanged a brief look before returning to their patrol car, their presence no longer necessary, their role complete without the need for further action. And within minutes the sidewalk began to resemble itself again, ordinary, uninterrupted, as if nothing remarkable had happened. And yet something had shifted, something small but undeniable, and Ethan finally moved, adjusting the strap of his bag across his shoulder, the familiar weight grounding him as he stepped back toward the path he had been on before everything changed, his footsteps steady, unhurried, blending back into the flow of the city without drawing attention. And the golden light of the setting sun stretched long across the pavement, catching briefly on the edge of his worn sneakers, on the metal frame of a nearby street sign, on the windows that reflected a world continuing forward, and he did not look back, not because the moment did not matter, but because he understood that it did not belong behind him or ahead of him. It simply existed, complete in its own quiet way. And as he reached the corner, the pedestrian signal clicked softly, the white figure illuminating against the dimming sky, and he crossed with the same calm presence he had carried throughout, unnoticed by most, indistinguishable from anyone else passing through. And yet within him something had settled into place, not pride, not expectation, but a quiet certainty that what he had done did not need recognition to hold value. And the city, vast and indifferent as it often seemed, moved around him without pause. Cars passing, lights changing, voices rising and falling. But for a brief moment, in the reflection of a storefront window as he passed, there was a stillness that lingered, a subtle echo of a choice made when no one else stopped. And in that silence, deeper than any sound, there was something that remained, something that did not need to be spoken to, be understood, because it lived in the simple truth that when it mattered, he stayed.